At school, we were always taught about the Nazis in the same way, as if they were the embodiment of pure evil, as if they appeared out of nowhere, built a massive war machine without any help, and tried to conquer the entire world. As if Germany woke up one morning and decided to produce tanks and planes fueled purely by hatred. But that's not how things work in real life. A country cannot fight a war with ideology alone. Hatred does not produce tanks. Speeches do not make airplanes fly. For that, you need steel, you need fuel, and above all, you need enormous amounts of money. And in 1933, Germany had almost none of those things. It was a country coming out of the First World War. Its economy had collapsed. People were starving. In short, it was wounded. Unemployment had reached nearly 30%. Money had almost completely lost its value. People had lost their savings. Hopelessness was everywhere. Hitler emerged in exactly this environment. He shouted, he accused, he pointed to enemies and said, "I will make Germany great again." People were searching for hope. But you cannot build an army with hope. This is where the story no one tells you begins. This story does not start in Berlin. This story starts on Wall Street. In the 1920s, American banks were overflowing with money. The post-war economy had exploded. And for these banks, the world was seen as an investment field. Germany had lost the war, but it still had a massive industrial infrastructure, and it was desperate for loans. American banks saw this as an opportunity. A system called the Dawes Plan was established. J.P. Morgan, Chase, and other major banks stepped in. German debts were restructured. Bonds were issued. Germany was tied to American credit. This was not aid. This was an investment meant to be repaid with interest. The German economy was now effectively under the control of American financial circles. Between 1924 and 1931, hundreds of millions of dollars flowed from America to Germany. Billions in today's money. When Hitler came to power, he did not create a system from scratch. He took over an economic structure that was already built, financed, and kept alive, and assumed responsibility for it. American banks did not pull out. On the contrary, the system continued to operate. But money alone is never enough. The most basic requirement of modern warfare is fuel, and Germany had no oil, no access to the Middle East, no colonies, no oil within its own borders. Under normal circumstances, this would have meant the end of a large army, but it wasn't the end, because American corporations stepped in. Standard Oil, the company of the Rockefeller family, the foundation of what we now know as Exxon. This company partnered with Germany's largest chemical giant, IG Farben. IG Farben produced synthetic fuel and synthetic rubber during the war. It was also the company that manufactured Zyklon B, used in the gas chambers. Standard Oil provided Germany with the technology to produce gasoline from coal. Synthetic fuel. Without this technology, the Nazi army would have come to a halt within 6 months. Tanks could not have advanced. Planes could not have taken off. They knew this. They knew the German military depended on this technology. Yet the cooperation continued even after Poland was invaded, even after the war officially began. Then there is IBM, the major technology company we know today. At the time, it produced punch card systems. And those systems were not used in Germany just for accounting. They were used in concentration camps to classify people. Who was Jewish? Who was not? Who could work? Who could not? Who would be transported? Who would be labeled unfit? This was not chaos. This was a planned data system. IBM machines were present in every camp. IBM's German subsidiary maintained the machines, sent technicians, kept the systems running. The headquarters in New York made money from every card, every lease. They did not pull the trigger, but they organized death, they accelerated it, they made it industrial. Let's look at Ford. Henry Ford did not hide his anti-Semitism. He openly targeted Jews in his newspapers. He published fake conspiracy texts. Hitler admired him. His portrait hung on Hitler's wall. He was seen as an inspiration. Ford's factories in Germany did not shut down when the war began. On the contrary, production increased. Trucks were built for the Wehrmacht. Engines were produced for military vehicles. This production was carried out using slave labor taken from concentration camps. People were worked, fell ill, died, and were replaced by others. Even after America entered the war, these factories continued operating as critical production centers for the Nazi regime. What happened after the war was even more disturbing. Ford demanded compensation from the US government, claiming that its German factories had been damaged by Allied bombing. In other words, it asked the American public to pay for damage to facilities that had served the Nazi military. General Motors was no different. The German brand Opel belonged to GM. A large portion of the trucks used by the Nazis were Opel vehicles. The Blitzkrieg, the so-called Lightning War, was carried out quite literally with American-made vehicles. After the war, GM also filed a compensation lawsuit. And it won. Chase Bank froze Jewish accounts after Paris was occupied. It helped the Nazis seize Jewish assets. This was happening while American soldiers were dying in Europe. Documents that emerged years later showed that bank executives knew exactly what was happening, but it was profitable. And as long as there was profit, morality came second. None of this was accidental. These were not mistakes made by lower-level managers. These were conscious, planned, high-level decisions. CEOs knew everything. Boards of directors knew. Shareholders profited. After the war, there was no serious reckoning. German industrialists were tried at Nuremberg, but American corporations were left untouched because they were needed. For the Marshall Plan, for rebuilding Europe, for the Cold War. Files were closed. Archives were skillfully locked away. It took decades for the truth to come out. The compensations were symbolic. Ford and GM paid amounts that were insignificant compared to what they had earned. IBM paid almost nothing. The companies moved on. They continued polishing their reputations. And now look at today. There are Uyghur camps in China. Forced labor exists, cultural destruction exists, and the same major corporations are there. Apple, Nike, Tesla. The excuses are always familiar. They say supply chains are complex. They say they can't control it. They say there is competitive pressure. The same things were said in the 1930s. The words changed, but the logic never did. The truth is this: corporations do not have a conscience. Corporations do not have memory either. Their only compass is profit. If there is profit, business continues. The cost is paid by others. Then the story is softened, covered up, and forgotten. This has always been their path. And this story did not end in 1945. It only changed form. The actors changed. The countries changed. But the system stayed the same. So what lesson should we draw from all of this? The first and most important lesson is this: history is not as simple as we are taught. It is not a fairy tale divided into good and evil. Great catastrophes often do not arrive shouting. They arrive in suits, in black coats, with contracts, credit agreements, and decisions made for business reasons. No one sees themselves as the villain. Everyone claims they were just doing their job. The second lesson is this: major crimes are never the work of a single madman. Hitler did not build everything alone. There was a system that made him possible. There was money, there was technology, there was logistics, and much of it came from institutions and individuals who claimed neutrality and chased profit. This is not just about ideology, it is about interests. The third lesson is this: we didn't know is rarely true. Documents show that many executives knew the truth. They knew what was being produced, who it was sold to, and what the consequences would be. But knowing was not enough to stop, because stopping had a cost. Continuing had rewards. The fourth lesson is this: when there is no accountability, history repeats itself. After the war, there was no true reckoning. Punishments were symbolic, reputations were protected, and the system continued as it was. That is why similar mechanisms operate today in other countries and against other peoples, because it was learned that this was possible. The fifth, and perhaps most uncomfortable lesson, is this: this system is not just their problem. We are all part of it, through the products we use, the brands we support, and the news we choose to ignore. Often not knowingly, but by choosing not to know, because knowing brings responsibility. This story teaches us this: evil does not always shout. Sometimes it is very quiet. Sometimes it is very profitable. And most of the time it looks completely normal.
That is where the real danger lies. If there is one lesson to take away, it is this: when power and money are left unchecked, morality does not emerge on its own. What is called "the market will fix it" usually calculates prices, not conscience. And if people stop asking questions, if they stay asleep, if they refuse to see uncomfortable truths, the system will continue exactly as it is. So, this is not about blaming the past. It is about understanding the present, recognizing the same excuses, the same phrases, the same silence when we see them again.
Because history is not over, and what repeats is not events, but humanity's choice not to learn from them. If this story gave you a new perspective, subscribe. The answers you're looking for are in history, and I'll show you where to look.